Hello and welcome to Science Saturday. Today we are going to learn a little bit about chemical reactions and things that can speed them up. So to start off with, let's review real quick a molecule you're probably familiar with, H2O or water. It has two hydrogens, one oxygen, and if we add another oxygen, then we get H2O2 or hydrogen peroxide. Now, hydrogen peroxide is something that you may have seen before. It's sold at a 3% solution in most pharmacies, and a lot of people will use it as a cleaning product to clean off cuts or small abrasions on the skin or for other cleaning purposes. Hydrogen peroxide is not entirely stable. Over time, especially if it's exposed to light, it will break apart and form water and oxygen. So here's the reaction that you would see happening if you had hydrogen peroxide in a clear bottle instead of a dark or opaque bottle. That's why it's always sold in bottles that are a dark color like this, that don't let light through. Because if you stored it in a clear plastic bottle, this would happen a lot faster, and over time, you wouldn't have hydrogen peroxide in your bottle anymore, you would just have water. And the oxygen gas would slowly come out of solution and disappear into the atmosphere. So this is the reaction that we're going to speed up today, because if we put hydrogen peroxide into a container, a cup, and we leave it out on the counter for several weeks, it will all turn into water. But we don't want to wait several weeks for this to happen. We want to see it happen much more quickly, so we are going to use a catalyst. That is our cool science word for the day. A catalyst is something that speeds a reaction up, and today our catalyst is going to be yeast. So here in this bottle, we are going to place our hydrogen peroxide. I'm going to pour in roughly about a cup of this liquid. And again, this hydrogen peroxide is a 3% solution. That means that 3% of this is H2O2 and the remaining 97% is water. So this is a rather dilute solution, which makes it very safe. This is going to produce some foam that would be safe to touch and not too hot, which is what we want. We want this to be a kid-friendly experiment. So we'll pour in our H2O2, or our hydrogen peroxide, and now we'll prepare our catalyst. Yeast is something that you may have seen before if you have ever made bread at home or pizza dough. It is used to make dough rise, because the yeast is alive. This is a dormant little fungus that when we add water and sugars or starches that it can consume, will wake up and become metabolically active. And that's just the scientific way of saying that it wakes up and is ready to eat some food. I'm going to add this yeast to water, about a spoonful of it, and stir it around so that it all gets hydrated. The reason that yeast is going to act as a catalyst is because yeast has a special enzyme in it, and this enzyme attacks and breaks apart hydrogen peroxide. It's a very fast enzyme, and it's one that is found in almost all living cells. This is why if you have a scrape and you pour hydrogen peroxide on it, you see bubbling just around where the scrape is, but not on the rest of your skin, because the surface of your skin, the cells on the surface, they're actually not alive anymore and not active. But if you receive a cut, then you've exposed living tissue, and that living tissue contains the enzyme catalase. It's an incredibly active enzyme, very fast, and it can turn a lot of hydrogen peroxide into oxygen and water very quickly. To prepare our elephant toothpaste experiment, there are a couple more things we want to add. The first is soap, because we will capture that oxygen gas better if we add a little bit of soap to our hydrogen peroxide. And then the next is food coloring, because this reaction is just a lot more fun if you add some color to it. I am going to just add drops across the top. So I'm going to put a drop of red here and here, some drops of green, and this should give some fun stripes and color to our elephant toothpaste as it comes out of the container. All right, now we're ready to add our catalyst. With 3% hydrogen peroxide and yeast as the catalyst, this reaction takes just a few seconds or so to get started and to come up. But once it gets going, you can see that we're getting a pretty good size volume of gas that's being produced. And now we're going to get it coming out the top. And Here comes the elephant toothpaste. You can see why this experiment got its fun name, because it does look somewhat like a tube of toothpaste being squeezed. Make sure if you're doing this at home that you are prepared with something underneath to catch the bubbles, because you will produce quite a bit of foam. There are a couple things I love about this experiment. First, it's very kid-friendly. The reaction does produce some heat, but at this concentration of 3% hydrogen peroxide and using yeast as a catalyst, it's not enough to be at all worrisome. The foam just feels pleasantly warm to the touch. And then the reaction's quite safe, because now all we have here is water, soap, and a little bit of oxygen gas, but not enough to be too worrisome with it being reactive or anything like that. So a super fun reaction to do. And now that I've showed you a basic demo for how it works, we should try to see if we can optimize the amounts that are used, because I just eyeballed this. I didn't measure my yeast or my water or the hydrogen peroxide I used. So we're going to set up a little series of bottles and see if we can figure out what concentration of water and yeast and hydrogen peroxide gives us the best results. So I have 3 bottles here and 3 cups. We're going to add a 1/4 cup of water to each cup and 1 cup of hydrogen peroxide to each bottle. And then we're going to vary the amount of yeast that we use. First is the cup with 1 teaspoon of yeast. Then the one that has 2½ teaspoons of yeast. And then our cup with 2 tablespoons of yeast. And this one is a lot thicker. You can see that clearly our one with additional yeast is going the fastest. Woo! It's a very nice toothpastey reaction here. Got a good stripe of foam coming down on all 3 bottles. You can see here our blue has just about stopped, and the inside of the bottle almost looks a little brown because there was so much yeast. The green has slowed down to almost a stop as well, but our red is still going quite nicely. If we mark the top of the foam with some food coloring, then you can see the speed at which the foam is coming out. And you can see that this bottle gives us a nice steady rate of foam being produced. I have 3 bottles here, and each of them has 1 ingredient that is missing. And I'll give you a hint, it is not the food coloring. Every single one of these bottles has 5 drops of green food coloring, and this bottle over here is our control. It has food coloring, hydrogen peroxide, soap, and yeast, along with water that's going to be added here in just a minute. I'm going to add ingredients to all of these at the same time. Then I'm going to step back, and I want you to see if you can identify which ingredient is missing from these 3 bottles, because each of them is missing just 1 ingredient of the elephant toothpaste reaction. Over on Patreon, there's a little coloring page that goes along with this activity. If you printed that out, then I hope you've already written down what your guess is for these 3 bottles, because now I'm going to tell you the answer. This one does not have any soap. So we had our 2 ingredients that we have to have that reaction. We had hydrogen peroxide and we had our catalyst, yeast. But without the soap to capture the bubbles, we did not see a column come up all the way out. You did notice, though, that we did have some bubbles, and that's just because of a natural surfactant that happens to be associated with the yeast that was there in solution. And it captured some of the gas, but it didn't capture it in a way that would lead to a whole big chain of elephant toothpaste coming out. This one has no yeast. The hydrogen peroxide in here is still hydrogen peroxide, and it has not produced a lot of oxygen gas. To have it go completely to oxygen gas and water, it's going to take quite a while. This one has no hydrogen peroxide, it's just water in here, and we added yeast. Then you can see that there's soap in here, but without the hydrogen peroxide, of course, we had no reaction. And then this is our control, which overflowed its container down here because we had yeast, hydrogen peroxide, and the soap to capture all of this. And those are the only 3 ingredients that you really need. We add our yeast to water to wake it up, but even if you just add plain yeast without the water, as long as you swirl it around and get it hydrated, it will still work. It just won't come out quite as quickly as it did here. How alive your yeast is makes a big difference. This yeast has been in my fridge for months and has been stored out of the fridge for several weeks at a time as well. This yeast is brand new and was just opened today. We're going to be putting this yeast into our elephant toothpaste bottles, and you'll see there's a big difference in the reaction speed between the old yeast and the new. Our new yeast definitely gave us a much faster reaction. It's all finished reacting now. And the older yeast is still going slowly but steadily. One of the most common questions that I get when I do this at school visits is, can you touch the foam? And you can. That's one of the benefits of using 3% hydrogen peroxide, is that this is a very kid-friendly experiment. The reaction produces some heat, but only enough to make the foam pleasantly warm to the touch, not to make it hot. Also, 3% hydrogen peroxide is not strong enough to irritate most people's skin, and most of what was hydrogen peroxide has turned into oxygen and water. So this really is just soap solution, food coloring, and a bit of oxygen here. Now, if you used food coloring to stripe your elephant's toothpaste like I did, then playing with the foam will result in some stained fingers. And washing your hands with a little bit of shaving cream helps that staining from the food coloring not to be quite as bright. If you want to have a tower of foam, hydrogen peroxide and yeast are not the only things that you can use. You can also add soap, baking soda, and vinegar together to make a foaming reaction. So here I have a 1/4 cup of water with 3 tablespoons of baking soda, some soap, and food coloring. And then in this container we have our soap and hydrogen peroxide. And I'm going to let you pick, Math Dad, if you want to add the vinegar or the yeast.
The yeast.
All right, so we're going to compare these two. So you're going to, on the count of 3, you'll kind of scroll it around to make sure all that yeast is ready. You'll pour it into your funnel and then just remove the funnel and step back. We'll see what happens.
All right.
All right, 1, 2, 3.
Oh no, you're winning.
We definitely get a better toothpastey reaction with our hydrogen peroxide and baking soda than we do. I don't know, this one's slowed down now. Now we're getting some toothpaste action there too. But yeah, so here's our vinegar and baking soda, and here's the hydrogen peroxide and yeast. You see they both produce nice foaming reactions as long as you add some soap to capture the gas. So you can see some reactions happen immediately. When you add baking soda to vinegar, you get a reaction right away, no matter what. Other reactions need a little bit of help to get started, or can be sped up a lot with the use of a catalyst. And that's what we had here with our yeast and the hydrogen peroxide. And remember, the reason that yeast speeds up that reaction is because it contains an enzyme known as catalase. And that enzyme catalase is a type of catalyst. I know that might be a little confusing, but the name of this particular enzyme sounds so similar to the word catalyst, which means something that speeds a reaction up. All enzymes are proteins, and many of them work by taking the molecules that are going to be reacting and putting them in the right position and helping out so that then the reaction can happen a little more easily. Enzymes are incredibly important for all of our biological functions. If you are watching this video right now, part of the reason that you were able to see it has to do with enzymes in your body that are causing reactions to occur right now. They're super important. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Science Saturday. Don't forget to head over to Patreon, where you can find activity pages and coloring sheets that you can download to take your learning a step deeper. If you are a kid watching this video, please be sure to ask permission from a grown-up before you do science at home, because I don't want you to get in trouble because you didn't ask before you started experimenting. Work hard, grow smart, and I will see you next week. Okay. So when I asked Math Dad to sing the safety song this week, he said that he thought the safety song was a little boring and we should make it more interesting by planking. Basically, he challenged me to a plank contest.
I don't think she can plank through the whole song.
And I said yes, so let's go.
Protect both your eyes, you only have to. Put goggles on, that's the right thing to do. Be safe doing science at home.
I think we should sing it faster.
Lab coat and gloves, cover the skin. Keeping you safe is what we call win-win. Be smart doing science at home. Consider risk and danger, evaluate the cost. Be aware of circumstance to minimize the loss.
Yeah.
If you make a mess,
clean it up quick. That's common sense and a valuable tip. Be good doing science at home. We hope that you learn lots of things here. Join us each week for science and share. Be smart doing science at home. I did it! I did it!
You made it.
I planked through the whole song.
Good job, Science Mom.